I didn't recognize Rocco Vitale when he sat down. That's the first thing people always get wrong about the night it started. When the headlines in my life began writing themselves in ink that wouldn't wash off. Everyone assumes I must have seen him, must have felt the room tilt toward him the way rooms tilt toward hurricanes, must have clocked the expensive suit, the watch that could pay my rent for a year, the men at his shoulders like shadows trained to bleed first. But faces don't behave for me the way they behave for other people. In my world, a face is a beautifully rendered mask you're not allowed to keep. I can look straight at someone in full daylight and still fail to find them in a crowd 10 minutes later. I can watch a man smile and remember his teeth like a row of white commas, remember his eyebrows like a question mark, remember the shape of his cheekbones like a sculpture in a museum, then see him again and feel nothing click into place. Prosopagnosia, doctors call it, as if a Greek word makes it less humiliating. Face blindness, normal people call it, because normal people like their truths simple. I call it freedom and fear, depending on the day. Freedom, because nobody's reputation can enter my body through a photograph. Nobody's face can become a weapon aimed at me. Fear, because sometimes the wrong man can stand in front of you, and you won't know you've met him before. Until it's too late. That night on the Navigli, Milan was wearing spring like an easy lie. The canal water carried the lights and the laughter the way it always does in that district. Canal side tables, glass clinks, voices rising and falling like music. It was the hour when the city pretends it's only romance. It's only aperitivo, only the soft seduction of Italy. It was also April, close enough to Milan Design Week, that you could feel the city stretching its muscles, ready to fill with strangers and money and parties louder than their intent. I was working at a place called Ombra e Luce, Shadow and Light, a restaurant that pretended it was casual while charging for ambiance. People came for the view, the way the canal framed reflections, the way candlelight made them look kinder. I came because it was controlled chaos. Service jobs are easier when you can't read faces. Everything is script and ritual. Greet, pour, ask, clear, smile. You don't need recognition, you need rhythm. I'd been in Milan long enough to perform Italian like a second skin. Polite, musical, quick. I didn't have a Milanese accent. I didn't need one. I needed the right tone for wealthy men who like feeling important, and couples who like feeling seen, and tourists who like feeling authentic. That night, my manager, Julia, had warned me before the first table even sat. Big group, she said, tightening her apron like a belt before battle. Very important. Don't improvise. I almost laughed, because improvisation was the only reason I was alive in the world. Don't worry, I told her. I'm incapable of improvising. Julia stared at me, unimpressed. Then he arrived, not with sirens, not with drama, not even with obvious arrogance, just a shift in the sound of the room. If you want to understand me, understand this. I hear rooms the way other people see them. I've trained myself to map spaces with audio, because I can't trust faces. I can tell when a man steps into a restaurant and everyone's breathing changes to make room for him. I can tell when a laugh isn't joy, but permission. The room softened at the edges, the chatter lowering half a note, the waiters straightening their shoulders as if pulled by invisible strings. Julia's voice went tight. Table 7, she murmured. You. I should have asked why. I should have pushed back. But something in her tone wasn't, I'm your boss. It was, please don't let him eat us. So I picked up my tray, grabbed the water carafe, and walked toward table 7. 3 men sat there, but only one mattered. I didn't know his face. I didn't know his name. I knew his stillness. He sat like an anchor. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone. He didn't perform interest in the canal or the menu. He simply existed, and the existence was enough to reshape everything around him. 2 other men watched the room with their bodies, not their eyes. They were trained, the way people are trained when they don't get second chances. The man in the center looked up as I approached, and I felt his gaze land on me like a hand, not touching, but close enough to warm skin. Buonasera, I said, professional. Acqua? He didn't answer immediately. He studied me in silence long enough that a normal waitress would have started sweating. I didn't. I smiled, because smiles are armor. I smiled, because when you can't read faces, you learn to control your own. Yes, he said finally, in English, as if he'd chosen the language with intent. His accent was Italian, but softened by the kind of education money buys. I poured water into 3 glasses, the candlelight shivering on the surface. Sparkling or still? I asked. Still, he said, his voice. That was the first thing that registered in me as something to remember. Not deep, not gravelly, not trying to be intimidating. It was controlled, measured, confident without forcing it. A man who didn't need volume to command attention. I handed him the menu. He didn't take it. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded bill. and slid it across the table toward me with 2 fingers. Green, American, $10. And he did it right in the middle of ordering, not at the end, not as a thank you, not as a gesture of appreciation, a baited hook tossed into water to see what would bite. In Italy, tips happen, but they aren't the culture's heartbeat, and people have other charges on the bill, coperto, service lines, so an American 10 isn't normal. It's a signal, a challenge, a foreign object meant to make you feel small. He watched my face as the bill approached, like he wanted to see the exact second greed or fear would flicker. He didn't know how funny that was. Faces lie to me. I can't rely on them. So I've learned to watch intention instead. I didn't touch the 10. I didn't recoil either. I let it sit there on the table between us like a tiny hostage. Then I looked at him and said, very calmly, "That's not a tip." His left eyebrow rose slightly. The men beside him shifted, almost imperceptibly, a tightening. He leaned back in his chair, amused in the way dangerous people get when they think they've found entertainment. "No," he said. "What is it then?" "A test," I replied. He stared at me. In the candlelight, his face was a sculpture I wouldn't be able to recognize tomorrow, but his silence was clear as a bell. He had expected me to deny, or accept, or pretend not to notice, not to name the thing. "You think I'm testing you," he said, voice smooth. "I know you are," I said. His mouth twitched as if he might smile, but he didn't let it become one. "And what do you think the test is?" he asked. I glanced down at the bill and then back at him. "You want to see what I do when you dangle money," I said. "Whether I reach for it like a dog reaching for a treat, or refuse it like I'm above it. Either way, you learn something." His gaze sharpened. "And what does it tell you about me?" he asked. "If I'm testing?" I should have stopped. I should have played polite. Julia had told me not to improvise, but I've spent my life in a condition where the world is an improv stage and everyone else got the script. So I told the truth. "It tells me you're bored," I said, "and lonely." Silence hit the table so hard I could feel it in my ribs. The bodyguards didn't move. The canal didn't stop. But something in the man's posture changed. So slight it was almost nothing, yet it was everything. Lonely wasn't an insult. It wasn't flattery either. It was exposure. He leaned forward a fraction, a voice lower. "You think a man like me is lonely?" "I think," I said carefully, because now I could hear the danger in the air, "that you don't believe anyone speaks to you unless they want something. So you test people to confirm it, because if you're right, you don't have to risk hoping." His breath left him, slow. One of the men beside him murmured something in Italian I didn't catch. Maybe a warning, maybe a threat. The man in the center lifted one finger, and the other man went quiet instantly. He kept his gaze on me. "And what do you do?" he asked. "When someone tests you?" I looked at the $10 bill again, then reached out. His eyes narrowed, watching my hand. I picked up the bill. Just for a second, I held it between my fingers, feeling the paper, the strange foreign texture. America pressed into cotton and ink. Then I placed it back down on the table, folded, so the face on it disappeared. And I said, "I test them back." His stare didn't waver. "What's your test?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Can you accept a no?" I said, "without punishing the person who gave it?" That hit him like a punch he hadn't seen coming. Because men like him, men with shadows for friends and power for breakfast, don't get told no without consequences. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at me the way you look at a door you assumed was locked until someone opens it from the inside. Then softly he said, "Name." "What?" I blinked. "Your name," he clarified. "Tell me your name." I hesitated, not because I wanted to be coy, because names are handles, and in Milan, handles pull you into places you didn't plan to go. "Catherine," I said. His mouth shaped it silently first, as if tasting it. "Catherine," he repeated. Then he pushed the $10 bill 1 inch closer to me. "If you take it," he said, voice quiet. "What does it mean?" I answered without hesitation, because that was my superpower. Honesty delivered like a blade. "It means you get to pretend you've proven something about me," I said. "And I have to pretend you didn't just prove something worse about yourself." His eyes narrowed. "And if you don't take it?" he asked. "It means," I said, "I'm not interested in being your experiment." The room held its breath. Then he did something unexpected. He nodded. Once. As if he'd just received an answer he didn't realize he wanted. He picked up the bill, tucked it back into his pocket, and said, "Order." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation into normalcy, as if he were letting me reset the moment. "Tonight's special is," I began, professional again, but the air had changed, and he knew it. He ordered simply, fish, salad, sparkling water for the table despite having said still earlier, as if he wanted to see whether I'd correct him. I didn't, not because I was intimidated, because control games bore me. When I walked away, I felt his gaze follow my back like a question asked silently. Julia cornered me near the kitchen. "What did you do?" she hissed. I blinked. I took his order. Her eyes were wide, sharp with fear. Catherine. That was Rocco Vitale. The name hit me like a thrown stone. I didn't know his face, but I knew his gravity. I knew the way the room had bent. I knew the way Julia's voice had tightened the moment she said important. Rocco Vitale. The kind of name you hear in fragments. Whispers in kitchens. Cautions in taxis. Rumors dressed as jokes. My stomach went cold. Julia grabbed my wrist. Don't talk to him. Don't look at him. Don't be clever. Too late. I pulled free gently. I wasn't clever, I lied. Julia stared at me like she didn't believe it. Then her gaze flicked over my shoulder, and all the color left her face. I turned. A man stood in the kitchen doorway, not wearing an apron, not belonging to Hombre Luz. He was smiling. He held a $10 bill in his hand, the same green, the same foreign ink. He lifted it slightly like a greeting. I felt my pulse jump. Not because I was afraid of money, because I recognized the voice before he spoke, not the words, the sound, the shape of it. A voice I'd heard through static years ago, layered under screams and sirens and a crying mother begging someone not to hang up. A voice I'd spent months trying to forget. He smiled wider and said, in English, "You work here?" Julia made a sound like a trapped animal. I kept my face neutral, my spine straight. "Yes," I said. His eyes scanned me, up, down, then settled on my face as if he could read the fear I refused to show. "Good," he said, "because I'm looking for a man." My throat tightened. Julia stammered, "Sir, we can call someone." He raised the $10 bill, silencing her with the gentlest gesture. "No need," he said. "I just need a question answered." His gaze locked on me. "Have you ever seen this bill before tonight?" he asked. The kitchen seemed to tilt. I tasted metal in my mouth, because the answer was yes. Not because I'd seen that particular serial number, because I'd just watched Rocco Vitale slide it across a table like bait. The man's smile sharpened. He knew. He had come in at the exact right time. He was playing a game I didn't understand, and the bill was a piece on the board. I forced my voice steady. "No," I lied. The man's smile didn't disappear. It deepened, like a crack widening. He leaned closer, voice dropping so only I could hear. "You're a terrible liar," he murmured, "but you're brave." Then he placed the $10 bill on the counter beside the knives and said softly, "Tell Rocco I said hello," and he walked out of the kitchen like he hadn't just turned the air into ice. Julia grabbed my arm again, nails digging. "Who was that?" she whispered. I swallowed hard, keeping my face calm because panic in service spaces spreads like fire. "I don't know," I said. It was half true. I didn't know his name. But I knew his voice, and that was worse. Because voices don't lie to me the way faces do. I finished the shift with my body moving on habit, and my brain sprinting ahead, trying to outrun the fear climbing my throat. Rocco's table stayed calm all evening. No raised voices, no sudden violence, no drama. That almost made it scarier. When I brought dessert, he looked up at me and said quietly, "You're shaking." I wasn't. Not visibly, but he could hear it maybe in my breath. I set the plate down carefully. "I'm fine," I lied. His gaze held mine like a slow grip. "Someone spoke to you," he said, not a question. I hesitated. He leaned forward slightly, voice even. "Catherine," he said, "I don't care what you think you owe your manager, or your job. If someone threatened you in my orbit, it becomes my problem." A laugh nearly escaped me, sharp, disbelieving, because men like him don't say my name like concern. They say it like ownership, but there was no ownership in his tone, only focus. I swallowed. "A man came into the kitchen," I said quietly. He had a $10 bill. Rocco's posture changed. The air tightened around him. His face, whatever it looked like, went still in a way I recognized as restraint. "What did he say?" he asked. I should have stayed silent. I should have pretended it was nothing. But the voice in my memory, the one from years ago, had crawled out of the past and placed itself on my counter like a snake. "He said," I told Rocco, "to tell you hello." Rocco stared at me for a long moment. Then he murmured something in Italian to one of his men. The man moved instantly, leaving the restaurant without looking panicked. Rocco looked back at me. "Did he give a name?" he asked. I shook my head. Rocco's gaze sharpened. "Did you recognize him?" I hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any confession. Rocco leaned forward, voice low enough to be intimate in the worst way. "Catherine," he said, "if you know something, you tell me now." I should have lied again, but I have a personal rule. Once you've said the truth to a dangerous man, lies become louder. They become bait. So I told him the part that mattered. "I recognized his voice," I said. Rocco froze. Then slowly he said, "How?" "I have face blindness," I answered, because suddenly honesty wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. I don't recognize people by face. I recognize them by voice. And that voice... My throat tightened. I've heard it before. Rocco's silence wasn't empty. It was calculating. Then he said something that made my skin chill. "That man," he murmured, "should not be in Milan." I stared at him. Rocco's gaze didn't waver. "And he should not know my name," he added. Something in my chest tightened. I realized in a sudden clean flash that the $10 test at the beginning of the night had never been just about me. It had been about him trying to measure whether the world was safe enough to breathe in. It wasn't. Rocco reached into his pocket, pulled out the $10 bill again, and held it between us. He didn't offer it now like bait. He held it like evidence. I tested you, he said quietly, because my world is full of people who take money and call it loyalty. I said nothing. Rocco's gaze lowered briefly to my hands, steady on the tray, then back to my eyes. And you, he said, didn't take it. You didn't even hate me for offering it. I let out a breath. I did hate you, I corrected, for about 3 seconds. A flicker, something like amusement, touched his voice. Then it was gone. But your answer, he said softly, wasn't anger. No, I admitted. What was it? He asked. I looked at him, feeling the strange intimacy of telling truth to a stranger whose name carries fear. It was pity, I said, and that should scare you more than anger. Rocco's breath left him. He stared at me as if the air had shifted into something he didn't know how to navigate. Then he leaned back, voice rougher, and said, "Come with me." My stomach dropped. No, I said instantly. Rocco's gaze sharpened. This isn't... He stopped, exhaled, then tried again in a tone that didn't sound like an order. I'm not asking you to become part of my life. You just said come with me, I replied. I'm asking you, he said carefully, to walk out the back door tonight instead of the front. My throat tightened. Why? I demanded. Rocco's voice went lower. Because the man who came into your kitchen used a $10 bill to mark a conversation, he said. And that means he's collecting patterns, people, leverage. My pulse jumped. And you think I'm leverage? I said. Rocco's silence lasted half a beat too long. Then he said bluntly, yes. I stared at him. Rocco's voice didn't soften, but not in the way you think. He leaned forward, intensity tightening the air. If he can pull you into this and make you afraid, he can force you to speak. If you speak, he gets to me. I swallowed. Anger and fear tangled together. You tested me, I reminded him. Now you're, what, protecting me? Rocco's voice held something like frustration. I am containing a risk, he said. I laughed sharply. That's romantic. Something in his breath changed. He didn't respond to the sarcasm. He only said, Catherine, please, please. The word hit me harder than any threat could have. Because it didn't belong in his mouth. It revealed a crack, and cracks are where hearts live. I stared at him for a long moment, then looked toward the dining room, where Julia was trying to pretend everything was fine. I looked back at Rocco. If I walk out with you, I said slowly, I am not your captive, not your employee, not your fix. Rocco's voice was immediate. Agreed. And you answer one question, I continued, right now. Rocco's breath left him slowly. Ask. I held his gaze. Why did my answer matter to you? I asked. Not the test. My answer. Silence. Then his voice dropped, quiet enough that the words felt like they were meant for only me. Because you didn't react to me, he said. You reacted to my intent. My chest tightened. And because you were right, he added. I am lonely. The honesty was so unexpected I nearly stopped breathing, but I didn't have time to process it. Rocco rose smoothly, his bodyguard appearing instantly at his shoulder. Rocco didn't touch me. He didn't grab my wrist. He didn't drag. He waited. So I walked. Not because I trusted him, because the man with the voice from my past had just stepped into my present, and I refused to let fear decide my next move. We left through the staff corridor, down the alley, into the cold spring air behind the restaurant. Milan at night smells like wet stone and perfume and history. Rocco's car waited like a dark animal with its engine running. As we approached, a figure detached from the shadows. My body went still. I couldn't read his face, but I could hear him breathe. It was the same voice. The kitchen voice. He was there, in the alley, like he'd known exactly which door I'd come through. Rocco's bodyguards moved fast. Rocco moved faster. He stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body, and addressed the man in Italian with a calm, so cold it made my skin prickle. You're late, Rocco said. The man laughed softly. The sound cut through me like an old scar. I like to arrive, the man replied in English now, when people are making choices. Well, Rocco's voice stayed even. You shouldn't be here. And yet, the man said, here I am. I gripped my own hands behind my back to keep them from shaking. The man's voice turned toward me. Hello, Catherine. My stomach dropped. He knew my name. I hadn't given it to him. Rocco's body stiffened. Anger, lethal and contained. The man chuckled. Oh, don't look so offended, Rocco. Names are easy. Rocco's tone sharpened. Not hers. The man sighed theatrically. Still pretending you care about boundaries. Then his voice softened as if he were speaking to a child. Catherine, do you know what you did tonight? I forced myself to answer, because silence is sometimes surrender. I served food, I said. The man laughed. You broke a pattern, he corrected. Rocco Vitale is famous for tests. He doesn't do generosity, he does traps. And you? His voice warmed with something like admiration. You turned the trap around. I swallowed. Rocco's voice went low. Leave. The man ignored him. Catherine, he said, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Don't fall in love with men who use experiments instead of honesty. My stomach twisted. Rocco's voice turned dangerous. Enough. The man finally shifted his attention back to Rocco. You're being sloppy, he said. Design week is coming. The city will be full. Cameras everywhere. Foreigners everywhere. So many beautiful accidents waiting to happen. Rocco's posture tightened. The man's voice was still polite. I want what you have, he said. And I want it without blood. If you give it to me, you keep your life. You keep your city. And you keep your new interest. My breath caught. I looked at Rocco. His face unreadable to me, but his silence loud. What is he talking about? I asked. Rocco didn't answer. The man smiled. He won't tell you, he said softly. Because the moment you know, you become dangerous. Then he placed a $10 bill on the hood of Rocco's car, a perfect echo of the restaurant. The same bait. He tapped it once with his fingernail and said, I'll see you soon. And then he walked away, dissolving into the Milan night like he had never been there at all. For a full second, none of us moved. Then Rocco exhaled, sharp, and turned to me. We're leaving, he said. I stared at him. Who was that? Rocco's voice was tight. A ghost. That's not an answer, I snapped. Rocco's gaze, whatever his eyes looked like, felt like it pinned me. It is, he said. The most honest answer I have. I got into the car because my legs were still obeying survival. Inside, the leather smelled expensive and clean, and the silence between us felt like a weapon laid on the seat. Rocco didn't speak until we were moving, the city lights sliding past like reflections in canal water. Then he said, I owe you an apology. I let out a shaky laugh. For what? The test? The bait? The ghost? For underestimating you, he said simply. My throat tightened with something I refused to name. In the quiet of the moving car, his voice felt closer, warmer, more human. I told you, I said. I test people back. Rocco's breath shifted, almost a sigh. What do you want to know? He asked. There were 100 questions clawing at my throat, but I chose the one that mattered most. What do you have? I asked, that a man like that would use me as leverage to get? Rocco's silence stretched. I felt the car turn, the tires humming differently, as if we'd entered a quieter neighborhood. Then Rocco said quietly, my voice. I blinked, confused. Your voice? Rocco's jaw tightened. Not literally, he said. Not as a metaphor, as a weapon. I stared. Rocco's voice went colder. Someone has been using recordings, he said. Orders sent in my name, confessions spoken in my cadence, deals made with my tone. My skin prickled. He wasn't describing rumor. He was describing something technical, something terrifying. You're being impersonated, I said slowly. Rocco's voice cut sharp. Yes. My pulse jumped. Because if you cannot trust a voice, then you cannot trust identity at all. Rocco's voice lowered. That man, he said, used to work with me. I swallowed. What do you mean used to? Rocco's silence was a door half open. Then he said, he taught me how to sound like power. My chest tightened. And now, Rocco continued, he's using that lesson to bury me. The car slowed, turning into an underground garage, a private building, quiet, secure. Rocco's driver stopped. Rocco turned toward me. Catherine, he said, and hearing my name in his voice did something dangerous inside me. You told me you recognize people by sound. I nodded, wary. Rocco's gaze held mine. Can you tell, he asked, when a voice is lying? I stared at him, not because I didn't understand, because I did. And understanding meant stepping into something that could swallow me whole. Yes, I said finally, sometimes. Rocco's breath left him. Then he said, very quietly, I need you. The words hit the car like a sudden silence. I forced myself to speak. You don't need me, I corrected. You need a technician. Rocco's voice was immediate. No, I stared. Rocco's voice softened by a fraction. A technician sells skills, he said. You don't sell. My throat tightened. I shook my head. I'm not your solution, I said. Rocco's gaze stayed locked on me. Then be my mirror, he said, just long enough to tell me what's real. I hate that line worked. Mirror. Because I was tired, so tired, of the world telling me the only way to survive face blindness was to cling to other people's certainty. Rocco wasn't asking for certainty. He was asking for truth. And truth is the one thing I can give without seeing a face. I swallowed. One condition, I said. Rocco waited. You don't test me again, I said. Not with money, not with fear, not with staged danger. Rocco's voice was immediate. Agreed. And you answer when I ask questions, I added. Even if you don't like them. Rocco's pause was short. Then, agreed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Fine, I said. Tell me what you want. Rocco's voice went steady. Tomorrow, he said. You come with me to a place where my voice is being stolen. My stomach tightened. And where is that? I asked. Rocco's mouth, whatever shape it was, curved in something I heard more than saw. The quietest room in Milan, he said. A room built for sound. The next day felt unreal, like my life had shifted into a different genre overnight. I woke in my own apartment, small, tidy, deliberately anonymous, and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to tell myself I was still just a waitress. Then my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A single text. Car downstairs. 10 danes. No emojis. No softness. Yet my pulse still jumped. I told myself it was adrenaline. I told myself it was curiosity. I refused to call it anything else. Downstairs. The car door opened before I touched it. Rocco's driver said nothing. I slid in. Rocco was already in the back seat. He wore a dark coat. His hands rested loosely on his knees. He looked like a man who slept in fragments. I couldn't recognize his face from last night. But the moment he said, "Buongiorno, Catherine," I felt the map click in my head. Voice, calm, breath, controlled, cadence, measured, as if he never wasted syllables. I sat opposite him, posture straight. "Where are we going?" I asked. Rocco's gaze studied me. "You didn't run," he observed. "I said I'd come," I replied. "I don't break my word." Something in his breath shifted, like approval. "We are going," he answered. "To a sound studio." I blinked. "A recording studio?" Rocco's voice went tight. "Not music." The city moved past the tinted windows, tram lines, old buildings beside new glass, sunlight catching the edges of Milan like it was trying to make the city look innocent. We drove toward an industrial district where warehouses sat like sleeping beasts. Then we turned into a courtyard and stopped in front of a building with no sign. Inside, the air smelled like metal and foam and silence. We were greeted by a woman with sharp cheekbones and an expression like a locked door. She spoke to Rocco in Italian, fast and professional. Rocco responded briefly. Then he turned to me. "This is Dr. Bianchi," he said. "She builds rooms for sound." Dr. Bianchi's voice assessed me. "You are the waitress," she said in English, not asking. "I'm Catherine," I replied. Her mouth tightened as if she found names inefficient. Rocco's voice stayed calm. "Show us." Dr. Bianchi led us through corridors lined with acoustic panels into a heavy door. She opened it. Inside was a room that felt wrong. No echo, no hum, no distant city, just absence. An anechoic chamber, I realized, though I didn't say it aloud. The kind of room where sound goes to die. Rocco stepped inside, his footsteps swallowed. I followed, my skin prickling. Dr. Bianchi shut the door behind us. The silence was so complete it made my heartbeat feel indecently loud. Rocco turned to me. "This is where his voice is stolen," he said. My throat tightened. "How?" Rocco reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a speaker. He pressed play. His voice filled the room, but it wasn't his. It was perfect in tone, perfect in cadence, perfect in the way a mimic can be perfect when they've studied enough. Yet there was something wrong, a cleanliness in the consonants, a smoothness in the breath, a lack of human micro-failures. It sounded like Rocco filtered through a machine that only understood the idea of him. The recording said, in Italian, a sentence I won't repeat here because the words were poison, an order. Then it stopped. Rocco's silence was heavy. I swallowed, my palms damp. "That's not you," I said. Rocco's voice was quiet. "How do you know?" I met his gaze. "I can hear the compression," I said, "the way the air gets flattened. A real voice has mess. Yours is messier." Rocco's breath shifted, a slow exhale. Dr. Bianchi watched me like I'd just performed magic. Rocco's voice tightened. "He's using this room," he said, "or a room like it, to build recordings that can't be traced. No echo signature, no location noise." Dr. Bianchi spoke sharply. "Not my room," she said. "I would never." Rocco's voice went cold. "Someone accessed your work." Dr. Bianchi's jaw tightened. I listened, not to their words, but to the way her breath quickened. Fear, not guilt. That mattered. Rocco turned back to me. "Catherine," he said softly, "tell me something." I swallowed. "What?" Rocco's voice went almost intimate in the dead silence. "If you heard my voice telling you to betray me," he asked, "would you believe it?" My chest tightened. Because he was asking me whether sound can be trusted, and my entire life depended on sound. I held his gaze and said the truth. "No," I said, "I'd look for you." Rocco went still. In that echoless room, my words felt enormous. "I wouldn't believe a recording," I continued, voice steady, "because recordings don't bleed. They don't hesitate. They don't get tired. They don't carry regret." Rocco's breath caught. "Real people do," I added. The silence afterward was so thick it felt like a hand around my throat. Dr. Bianchi shifted, uncomfortable. Rocco's voice was lower when he spoke. "That," he murmured, "is the first tender thing anyone has ever said to me without trying to sell it back to me." My pulse jumped. I forced myself to stay sharp. "Who is he?" I asked. "The man last night." Rocco's voice tightened. "His name is Silvano," he said. "He used to be my consigliere." I blinked. "Your advisor." Rocco's laugh was dry. "My conscience," he corrected softly. My stomach turned. You had a conscience, I muttered. Rocco's breath shifted. Something like amusement. I did, he said. Then he taught me how to silence it. I stared at him. The romance of that line was terrible and tragic. A man who learned cruelty as a language. And now someone was using that language to destroy him. I swallowed. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why trust me? Rocco's answer was immediate. Because you cannot recognize my face, he said. So you cannot be seduced by my myth. My throat tightened. And because, he added, voice softer. When I tried to bait you with $10, you didn't bite. You spoke to the man under the suit. His honesty made my stomach twist with an emotion I didn't want. I cleared my throat. What do you want from me? I asked again, sharper. Rocco's gaze held mine. I want you to help me prove what's real, he said, and I want you to do it before Design Week fills Milan with noise. He didn't need to say why. The city was about to become crowded, distracted, full of events and foreign eyes. Perfect cover for a scandal, a stage confession, a public fall. I swallowed hard. What happens if you don't stop him? I asked. Rocco's voice went cold. He will make my own voice confess to crimes I did not commit, he said. Or he will make my voice declare war. My skin prickled. And if your men hear it, I said slowly, they'll follow. Rocco's silence was a confession. I exhaled slowly. I didn't want to be involved. I didn't want to be brave. But the truth is, bravery isn't a personality trait. It's a refusal to let fear write the ending. I met Rocco's gaze. Fine, I said. But I have another condition. Rocco waited. I swallowed. No lies, I said. If you lied to me, I walk. Not because I'm dramatic. Because my whole life depends on trusting the sound of truth. Rocco's voice went quiet. Understood, he said. Then he did something that made my breath catch. He stepped closer, just enough to change the air in the silent room. And he asked quietly, what did you do before you poured wine on the Navigli? I swallowed hard. The question shouldn't have felt intimate. It did, because it was curiosity without ownership. I worked, I said carefully, in voice authentication. Rocco froze. Dr. Bianchi's head snapped up. My throat tightened. Rocco's voice sharpened. You built this, he said. Not a question. I flinched. Not for him, I said quickly. Not for you. Not for Milan. For corporations. Security. Verification. Rocco's silence was dangerous now. And you left, he said. Yes, I replied, because I realized people don't use verification to protect. They use it to control. Rocco stared at me. In the dead silence of that room, I heard my own heartbeat. Then Rocco said softly, so you understand why this is war for me? I nodded. Yes, I whispered. I do. And in that moment, I realized what Silvano had done by appearing at my restaurant with an American $10 bill. He hadn't just marked me. He'd recruited me, not as a pawn, as a weapon pointed at the only man in Milan who still believed he could be more than his reputation. The next days blurred into something that felt like both work and seduction. Rocco didn't drag me into smoky back rooms with guns on tables. He didn't introduce me to the family. He didn't force me into loyalty. He brought me into places where sound mattered. A quiet office with thick walls where he played recordings of himself and forced me to listen for the microscopic cracks. A secure car where he spoke very little, and my brain began memorizing subtle things. How his breath changed when he was irritated, how his cadence slowed when he was thinking, how the Italian in his mouth softened when he said my name. Sometimes he tested me, but not with money now, with truth. He would ask questions that were too personal for a Mafia boss to ask a waitress. What scares you most? He asked once, while Milan rain tapped the windows like impatient fingers. I stared at him, wary that I'll trust a voice and be wrong, I admitted. Rocco's breath caught. Has it happened? He asked. I hesitated. He waited. No pressure, no impatience. So I told him the truth I rarely told. I once failed to recognize someone I knew. I said quietly. I walked past them. They thought I was cruel. I wasn't. I was blind. Rocco's voice softened. And what did you do? I learned to listen, I said. I learned to read rooms by sound. I learned to remember people like songs. Rocco went quiet. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, I've spent my whole life trying to make people listen to me. You spent yours learning how to listen. My throat tightened. We were dangerous mirrors to each other. Because a man like Rocco Vitale is not supposed to crave being known. He's supposed to crave being obeyed. And I, Catherine, the woman who can't recognize faces, is not supposed to crave intimacy with a man whose world is built on fear. Yet there it was, growing in the quiet places between recordings. The romance didn't arrive like fireworks. It arrived like a steady note held too long until it becomes impossible to ignore. The first time I realized I wanted him, we weren't touching. We were in Dr. Bianchi's facility again, listening to a recording of Rocco speaking in Italian about something I won't repeat because it was designed to poison a city. I paused the playback and said, "He's using your vowels, but the breath is wrong." Rocco's voice was tight. "Explain." "He's not tired," I said. "You sound tired when you lie." Dr. Bianchi blinked. "How could she?" Rocco cut her off, voice low. "Because she listens." Then he turned back to me. "Catherine," he said softly, "am I lying now?" The question was a blade, because it wasn't about the recording. It was about him. I held his gaze and listened, not to words, to intention. "No," I said. "You're terrified." Rocco's breath hitched, and that was when I wanted him, because terror is honest, and he had just let me hear it. Silvano moved again on the third day. Not with a gun, with a message. A package arrived at Ombre Luce for me during lunch service, a small black box with no return address. Julia's hands shook when she gave it to me. "Don't open it here," she whispered. I took it into the storage room, locked the door, and stared at it. My instincts screamed not to touch, but my life has taught me that fear sometimes hides the proof you need. I opened it. Inside was a tiny recorder and a slip of paper. One sentence, typed, "Play this for Rocco if you want him alive on April 21st. My stomach dropped. April 21st. The start of Salone del Mobile, the beginning of Design Week chaos. I shoved the box into my bag and walked out of the restaurant without finishing my shift. Julia called my name once. Panicked. I didn't stop. I called Rocco's number as I walked along the canal, my hands shaking. He answered on the first ring. "Catherine," he said. I swallowed hard. "He left me a message," I said. "A real one." Silence, and then Rocco's voice went razor calm. "Where are you?" "On the Navigli," I said. "Don't move," Rocco said. "I'm coming." "I'm not a child," I snapped. Rocco's voice cut sharp. "You are a target." The word chilled my blood. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered. Rocco's voice softened, almost painfully. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." Sorry. Another word that didn't belong in his mouth. I stood by the canal and watched the water carry reflections of people who didn't know their lives could change because of someone else's hunger. 10 minutes later, a car pulled up. Rocco got out. I didn't recognize his face, but I recognized the way the air tightened when he approached. I recognized the sound of his breath, controlled but strained. He stopped in front of me, eyes locked on mine. "Show me," he said. I pulled out the recorder. Rocco took it, held it in his palm for a beat, as if weighing whether to let poison into his ear. Then he pressed play. Silvano's voice filled the air between us. Not a recording of Rocco. Silvano himself. "Rocco," Silvano said softly, the tone almost affectionate. "You always believed power is sound. You believed if your voice held steady, the world would obey. You were right. That's why I'm taking it." A pause. "You found a girl who listens," Silvano continued. "How sweet. I wonder if she'll still listen when she hears you confess." Another pause. "On April 21st, at your Design Week event, your voice will tell your men to do something unforgivable, and the world will finally see you as you truly are." The recording ended. My throat tightened. Rocco's face, whatever expression it held, went still. Then he looked at me. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly. I swallowed. "Yes," I whispered. "What?" he demanded. I listened again in my mind, not to the threats, to the hidden intention. "He doesn't want to kill you," I said slowly. Rocco froze. "He wants to make you live," I continued, voice shaking, "after the whole world hates you." Rocco's breath left him, slow. "Yes," he whispered. "That's Silvano." I stared at him. "Why?" I asked. "Why would he do that?" Rocco's silence was heavy. Then he said the truth, because I was supposed to become him, he said quietly, and I didn't. My stomach turned. "What does that mean?" I asked. Rocco looked toward the canal, voice low. "Silvano believed the future of our world was legitimacy," he said. "And no blood in streets, no headlines, only influence, only business, only a clean face on dirty money." My skin prickled at the phrase clean face. "And you?" I asked. Rocco's voice hardened. "I believed a man should be able to sleep without telling himself he's a saint," he said. "Silvano wanted perfection. I wanted limits." I swallowed. "So he hates you," I said. Rocco's voice was quieter. "He loved me," he admitted, "as an idea." The honesty cut, because being loved as an idea is the loneliest kind of love. I watched Rocco stand there by the canal, the Mafia boss whose name makes kitchens go silent, and heard the crack under his control, and I realized something terrifying. My answer at the restaurant hadn't just stolen his heart, it had made him visible to himself, and that visibility was exactly what Silvano intended to punish. Rocco turned to me. "April 21st, he said. "We stop him before that." My pulse hammered. "How?" I asked. Rocco's voice went cold. "We find where he's building the fake recordings," he said, "and we burn it." My stomach tightened. "No," I said instantly. Rocco's gaze snapped to me. "You said no lies," I reminded him. You didn't say no violence. I'm saying it now, I replied, voice sharp. I'm not helping you burn a room full of machines so you can pretend the problem disappears in smoke. Rocco's voice tightened. You don't understand, he said. No, I snapped. You don't. Burning evidence is what guilty men do. Silence hit between us. Rocco's breath changed. Then quietly he said, So what do you propose, Catherine? The question should have been sarcastic. It wasn't. It was real. He was asking me, a waitress, a woman whose face blindness makes her invisible until she speaks. I took a breath, and I gave him something new. We trap him publicly, I said. Rocco's eyes narrowed. Publicly, yes, I said, voice steady now. He wants the world. He wants spectacle. Fine, we give him one. But not with blood, tack with sound. Rocco stared at me. What does that mean? He asked. I stepped closer, feeling my pulse in my throat. It means we force him to perform, I said. We bait him with a voice he can't resist, and when he shows himself, we record him, not as an AI file, as a human being losing control. Rocco's gaze sharpened. Dangerous. And how? He asked softly. Do you bait a man like Silvano? I swallowed. Then I said the truth that made my stomach twist. With you, I said. Rocco went still. I held his gaze. Not as bait the way you tried to bait me, I clarified. As a mirror he can't ignore. He doesn't want your death. He wants your humiliation. That means he'll come close enough to taste it. Rocco's voice was low. And you, he said, would stand in front of that? I lifted my chin. I stood in front of you, I replied. Rocco's breath left him, slow. Something shifted in his voice when he spoke next. Not soft, not sweet, but intensely, painfully human. You should hate me, he murmured, for pulling you into this. I stared at him. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I hate the part of you that thinks fear is the only language people understand. Rocco's silence was long. Then he said softly, And what language do you think they understand? I swallowed. Truth, I whispered, when it's finally loud enough. Rocco's breath hitched. Then he looked at me with something that felt like awe, and I realized, with a shock that made my skin prickle, that this was how hearts get stolen, not with kisses. With being heard. We built the trap in 4 days, not in secret basements with guns, in daylight, in offices with glass walls, in Dr. Bianchi's lab, in a rented Design Week space that Rocco owned through a chain of companies that looked harmless on paper. It was called Sala, the exhibition, a sound installation meant to be unveiled on April 21st. Officially it was art, a room where the acoustics changed as you moved, where your footsteps became music, where the city's noise dissolved into curated silence. Unofficially, it was my weapon. I designed the trap like you design a performance. Anticipate the audience, predict the ego, construct the climax. And Rocco surprised me by letting me. He didn't treat my plan like a cute idea from a girl playing detective. He treated it like strategy. He listened. Sometimes he argued, but not with dominance, with fear masquerading as logic. This is too public, he said once. That's the point, I replied. This is too slow, he snapped another time. Because you're addicted to fast outcomes. I shot back, and fast outcomes always cost blood. He stared at me then, silent, as if my words had found a wound. Then he said, almost bitterly, You speak like you've seen blood. I met his gaze. I have, I said, in conference rooms, in courtrooms, in recordings played back too late to save anyone. He went quiet. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. I didn't tell him that the reason I left voice authentication wasn't because I was morally pure. It was because I'd helped build a system that a powerful man used to ruin an innocent person, and I'd listened to the recording afterward, watched truth get crushed by verification. I'd quit because I couldn't stand hearing my own work used like a gun, and now I was in Milan, building a trap with sound to save a mafia boss from being destroyed by sound. Life has a cruel sense of irony. The closer we got to April 21st, the closer Rocco and I got to each other in ways that scared me more than Silvano did. It wasn't that Rocco became gentle. He didn't. He remained dangerous, precise, a man whose patience felt like a loaded weapon. But with me, he did something that unsettled me. He let himself answer questions. Not all of them, but enough. One night, after hours in the lab, when Dr. Bianchi had gone home and the city outside had quieted into midnight traffic, I found Rocco standing in the empty installation space. It was dark except for one light panel on the floor, glowing like moonlight. He stood in it, hands in his pockets, looking like he belonged more in shadow than light. I approached cautiously. You're still here, I observed. Rocco didn't turn. So are you, he replied. I stopped a few feet away, in the silence of the unfinished installation. The sound of our breath felt intimate. Why the $10? I asked suddenly. Rocco's posture tightened slightly. You're back to that, he said. Yes, I replied, because I want to understand the moment you decided I mattered. Rocco went still. Then he turned toward me. His face was a blur of features I wouldn't remember by morning, but his voice was clear as glass. I carry American money, he said quietly, because I hate the way euros make me feel. I blinked. What does that mean? Rocco's voice lowered. Euros are home, he said. They remind me everything I touch becomes mine. Dollars remind me I can still be foreign to something. My chest tightened. That's strangely poetic, I murmured. Rocco's breath shifted. Don't tell anyone, he said. They'll think I'm weak. I almost smiled. Then I sobered. You tested me, I said. But you chose $10. Why not 100? Rocco's voice went quieter. Because 10 is insultingly small, he admitted. Small enough to make a proud person react. Small enough to make a desperate person accept. Small enough to reveal who they are. I swallowed. And what did it reveal about me? I asked. Rocco's silence lasted a beat. Then he said softly, It revealed you don't want my money. You want my sincerity. My throat tightened. I forced myself to keep my spine straight. And why does that matter to you? I asked again. Rocco exhaled slowly as if choosing words cost him. Because sincerity is the only thing I can't buy, he said. The air between us tightened. I could feel the pull now, undeniable. Not lust, something more dangerous. Recognition. A man whose whole life was built on being recognized by the world, craving a woman who couldn't recognize his face at all. A woman whose whole life was shaped by not being able to recognize people, craving one voice she could trust. I swallowed hard. Rocco, I said quietly. He stilled at the sound of his name in my mouth. What? He murmured. If you're going to fall, I whispered, voice trembling despite my control. Don't fall into me because I'm new. Fall into me because you're ready to be real. Silence. Then very softly he said, That's what I'm afraid of. My chest tightened painfully. You're afraid of being real, I clarified. Rocco's voice was low. I'm afraid you'll hear it, he said. I stepped closer. One step. Careful. Deliberate. I already do, I whispered. And that was when he kissed me. Not like a man claiming a prize, like a man asking permission with his mouth. His lips touched mine with devastating restraint, as if he expected me to pull away, as if he was terrified of being refused and relieved that I hadn't. I didn't melt into him. I stayed present. I kissed him back slowly, deliberately, tasting the control and the hunger and the fear hiding underneath. His hand rose, paused near my cheek, then touched lightly, as if he remembered I didn't belong to him, even in desire. When we broke apart, our breath unsteady, he rested his forehead against mine. In the darkness, without face recognition, that gesture was pure closeness. Catherine, he whispered, if you betray me... I cut him off. I won't, I said. Rocco's breath hitched. Don't promise what you haven't measured, he murmured. I pulled back slightly, just enough to speak clearly. I have measured it, I replied. I don't betray people who let me hear their fear. Rocco went still. Then he whispered, almost to himself, You're going to ruin me. I should have said, good. Instead, I said quietly, maybe you need it. April 21st arrived like a deadline with teeth. Milan woke up buzzing. Design Week energy, foreigners everywhere, cameras, invitations, crowds, exactly the kind of noise that makes truth easier to hide. Our installation, Sala, was scheduled to open at night, a private preview for donors, designers, and powerful locals. Rocco's name wasn't on the event. His influence was. Silvano would come, because the bait was perfect. A sound room, a public moment, Rocco visible in a controlled environment, surrounded by strangers who didn't know they were sitting beside a war. I spent the day in a state of sharp calm. Not bravery, not panic, preparation. Because when you've lived your whole life without trusting faces, you learn to trust systems. My system was sound. Dr. Bianchi had installed hidden microphones designed to capture live voice prints, not to identify criminals for court, to trap one man in the act of losing control. Rocco's men were present but discreet. No visible guns, no intimidation, just pressure in the corners, like the room itself was guarded. Julia had been moved to a new job by Rocco's people. Not harmed, not threatened, simply relocated with a generous contract and a promise that Ombra e Luce would be left alone. I didn't thank Rocco for that. I stored it in my mind under proof he can choose different. At sundown, I stood alone in the installation space, listening to the building's quiet. The trap was ready. Rocco arrived an hour before guests. He wore a black suit, no tie, a cleanliness that looked like power without ostentation. He approached me and said softly, Are you afraid? I listened to his voice. He was terrified, but he was steady. "Yes," I admitted, "but I'm here." Rocco's breath shifted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the $10 bill, the original. He held it between us. My pulse jumped. "I kept it," he said. "Why?" I asked. Rocco's voice was quiet. "Because it reminds me," he said, "of the moment I met someone who didn't worship me or fear me." My throat tightened. Rocco held the bill out, not like bait, like an offering. "I'm not testing you," he said softly. "I'm asking." "Asking what?" I whispered. Rocco's voice dropped. "After tonight," he said, "if we survive what's coming, don't disappear." My chest tightened. It wasn't the cliché, "stay with me or go." It was the opposite. A man who could force an answer, choosing to ask for one instead. I swallowed hard and didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, because the doors opened and the guests began to arrive, voices spilling into the space like a tide. Designers, patrons, critics, people wearing black like it was their personality. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests, listening to the room fill. The installation responded as intended. The acoustics shifted subtly, footsteps changing tone. A laughter bending at the edges. Rocco moved through the crowd like a quiet center of gravity, speaking little, watching much. Then, 40 minutes into the event, I heard him, Silvano. Not because I recognized his face, because his voice carried something specific, an elegance that wasn't warmth, a softness designed to disarm, a confidence that didn't need to announce itself. He entered laughing at something someone said. His voice cut through the crowd and snapped into place in my mind like a blade sliding into a sheath. I felt my stomach drop. Rocco stiffened across the room as if he'd sensed it too. Silvano approached. He greeted patrons with ease, shaking hands, smiling in that polished way men smile when they think they're untouchable. Then his voice turned toward me. "Catherine," he said warmly, as if we were friends. My blood went cold. I forced a polite smile. "Good evening," I replied. Silvano leaned in slightly, voice low. "You look beautiful," he murmured. "Did Rocco buy you that dress?" My jaw tightened. "No," I said evenly. "I chose it." Silvano chuckled. "Of course you did," he said. "That's your charm." I felt Rocco approach behind me before I heard him. Not by face, by the way the air tightened. Rocco's voice cut in, colder. "Silvano." Silvano turned, delighted. "Rocco," he said, as if greeting an old friend at a gala. The two men stood facing each other, a war of voices. Silvano sighed theatrically. "You've built something lovely," he said. "A room built for sound." "How sentimental." Rocco's voice was razor calm. "You came," he said. Silvano smiled. "You invited me," he replied, "with your little sound temple." Rocco didn't respond. I watched, listening for micro cracks. Silvano's voice held excitement. Rocco's held restraint. Silvano's tone shifted, almost affectionate. "Do you know what I admire about you?" he asked. Rocco stayed silent. Silvano continued anyway. "You always believed you could control chaos by turning it into ritual," he said. "Tests, rules, limits. You're like a priest who swapped God for power." Rocco's voice turned ice. "And you," he said, "are like a priest who swapped faith for cruelty." Silvano laughed softly. "Cruelty is honest," he murmured. "You taught me that." Rocco's breath changed. Anger. Silvano stepped closer, voice dropping. "I'm here to watch you fall," he whispered, "and I'm here to watch her realize what you are." My stomach twisted. Rocco's voice was lethal. "Leave her out of it." Silvano smiled. "I can't," he said. "She's the whole point." My pulse hammered. Silvano's voice softened into something almost kind as he addressed me. "Catherine," he said, "do you know what Rocco did last month?" I stared at him, refusing to flinch. Rocco's voice cut sharp. "Silvano?" Silvano ignored him. He was baiting, but not with money. With narrative. This is what manipulators do. They don't threaten your body. They poison your perception. Silvano continued, voice gentle. "He ordered a man to be drowned," he said softly. "Not shot, not stabbed. Drowned. Because drowning looks like accident." My blood went cold. Rocco's breath went tight. I looked at Rocco, listening. Was there guilt in his silence? Was there denial? Was there fear? I heard fatigue, pain, not surprise. Silvano watched my face like a scientist. He smiled. "Did you hear it?" he asked. "The monster under the suit." My voice came out steady, because I refused to let Silvano's story become the room's truth. "I hear what you're doing," I said. Silvano blinked. "Oh, you're trying to make me react," I continued, "because you believe reaction is truth." Silvano's smile sharpened. "Isn't it?" "No," I replied. "Reaction is easy. Truth is what someone chooses when there's no audience." Silvano went still, because I'd named him. I turned my gaze, my attention, my voice, toward Rocco. Did it happen? I asked him quietly. What he said. Rocco's silence lasted a beat. Then, in a voice so stripped it terrified me, he said, "Yes." The word hit me. Silvano smiled, triumphant, but Rocco kept speaking, and I hated myself for it, he added. Silvano's smile faltered. Rocco's voice was steady now, clear, dangerous in its honesty. "I did it," he said, "because the man was selling children through my port, and I chose the fastest way to stop him, instead of the cleanest." Silvano's voice went sharp. "Listen to him justify—" Rocco cut him off, voice rising slightly. Not shouting, never shouting, but louder, commanding. "I am not justifying," Rocco said. "I am confessing." The room around us shifted. Nearby patrons turned, sensing something dramatic. Silvano's eyes narrowed. "You're doing this here?" he hissed softly, thrown off balance. Rocco's voice went cold. "Yes," he said, "because you wanted the world. Here." Silvano's posture tightened. I realized what Rocco was doing. He was refusing to be controlled by a deep fake confession by confessing his own truth, turning Silvano's weapon into ash. Silvano's voice sharpened with irritation. "You think honesty saves you?" he demanded. Rocco's voice was low. "No," he said. "I think it ruins you." Silvano's breath hitched. And then, because ego is predictable, Silvano snapped, not with violence, with voice. He leaned closer to Rocco, furious, and said a sentence in Italian. I won't repeat in full because it was an order meant for Rocco's men, a trigger phrase Silvano had trained them to obey. I watched Rocco's bodyguards stiffen. My blood went cold. This was it. Silvano was trying to prove control in public. Rocco's men twitched, caught between training and confusion, and I, face-blind Catherine, understood something in a flash. Silvano wasn't relying on recordings anymore. He was performing live. He was using his own mouth to mimic Rocco's authority, and the microphones hidden in Sala were capturing every syllable. My heart pounded. Silvano didn't realize it yet. Rocco's voice cut through, sharp as a whip. "Stop," he ordered his men. Two of them froze. One man, hesitated half a beat longer than the others, and in that half beat, I heard something. Not in his face, in his breath. A micro-laugh hidden, enjoyment. He wanted chaos. Rocco saw it too, I think, because Rocco's voice went quieter, deadly. "You," he said to that man. "Step back." The man didn't. Silvano smiled faintly. "There." The traitor revealed, not by cameras, by sound. Rocco's voice was calm again. "Silvano," he said softly. "You came here to steal my voice." Silvano's smile sharpened. "I already did." Rocco's voice dropped. "Then you'll enjoy this," he murmured. Rocco lifted his hand, and Dr. Bianchi, watching from a control booth behind glass, hit a switch. The room changed. The acoustics shifted suddenly into an amplified capture mode. A curated quiet that made every breath, every swallow, every micro sound feel enormous. Silvano's voice, when he spoke next, echoed unnaturally in the space. He startled. His breath betrayed him. For the first time, he sounded human, vulnerable, trapped. "What is this?" Silvano demanded. Trying to regain control, Rocco stepped closer, voice low. "It's a room designed to listen," he said. "The one thing you never learned how to survive." Silvano's smile cracked. "You think your little art trick." I stepped forward, cutting him off. Silvano's gaze snapped to me. I kept my voice steady, loud enough to carry, soft enough to feel intimate. "Silvano," I said. "Say the phrase again." He blinked. "What?" "The trigger phrase," I repeated. "Say it again, since you're so proud." Silvano's mouth tightened. He didn't want to, because he sensed, too late, the trap in repetition. Rocco watched him, silent. I held Silvano's attention. "Say it," I pressed. "Or admit you're scared." Silvano's nostrils flared, and pride, the oldest bait of all, made him bite. He repeated the phrase again, louder, his voice attempting to become command. The microphones captured it. The room's acoustics captured it. The recording systems captured it, but more importantly, the guests nearby heard enough to realize something ugly was happening, something beyond art. Someone gasped. Someone stepped back. Silvano's confidence wavered. Rocco spoke, voice cold. "That phrase," Rocco said to the room, "is not mine." Silvano laughed too sharp. "It sounds like you." Rocco's gaze, unreadable to me but clear in his tone, shifted to Dr. Bianchi's booth. Dr. Bianchi pressed play. Two voices filled the room back to back through the system. First, a recording of Rocco speaking the phrase. Second, Silvano speaking it live just now. To most people, they sounded identical. But then Dr. Bianchi played a third clip, the live feed again, slowed, isolating breath artifacts, micro breaks, the signature of a body. Then she played Rocco's real voice, recorded earlier that day in controlled conditions. The mess, the fatigue, the humanity. The difference became audible even to untrained ears. A murmur spread. Silvano's face, whatever it looked like, went pale. Rocco's voice cut through. You wanted to make my voice confess, Rocco said, so you could rule behind my shadow. Silvano's voice turned vicious. You don't deserve to rule at all, he hissed. You were supposed to become clean. You were supposed to become me. There, the confession. Public. Recorded. Human. Silvano's breath went harsh. He realized the room was no longer his stage. It was his cage. He turned sharply, trying to move toward an exit. Rocco's men blocked him, not with guns, with bodies. Silvano's voice rose. Move! He barked at them, trying the trigger phrase one last time. 2 men hesitated. One didn't. The traitor. He moved to help Silvano. Rocco's voice went lethal. Enough! The word hit the room like a hammer, and then something I didn't expect happened. Rocco didn't shoot. Rocco didn't order violence. Rocco reached into his pocket, pulled out the $10 bill, and held it up. And the absurdity of it in that moment, the small green paper in a room full of power, made me almost laugh. Rocco's voice was quiet, carrying. This, he said, is what you think loyalty costs. He looked at the traitor, then at Silvano. You think people obey because they're bought, Rocco continued. You think hearts are rented. He turned his gaze toward me. Catherine told me something on the Navigli, he said. She said control is what you do with money. Power is what you do when someone says no. My throat tightened. Rocco looked back at Silvano. So here is my no, he said softly. Then he tore the $10 bill in half. A gasp ran through the nearby guests. Not because of money, but because tearing something in public felt like a ritual. Rocco dropped the torn halves to the floor, and something snapped in his men. Not fear, recognition. They were watching their boss reject the oldest language in their world. Silvano stared, horrified. You're insane, he whispered. Rocco's voice was calm. No, he said. I'm free. Silvano's breath went ragged. He lunged toward me, fast, desperate. His hand grabbed my wrist, nails digging. My body reacted on instinct, not panic. I twisted, breaking his grip with a movement my boxing coach years ago would have approved of, and stepped back. Silvano's voice hissed in my ear, low and venomous. You, he spat. You ruined him. I met his gaze, useless to me in face terms, but his breath told me everything. He was terrified. I leaned in slightly and whispered, no. Silvano froze. I continued, voice soft enough to be intimate. He ruined you, I said, because he learned how to be honest. Silvano's face contorted. He tried to speak, but the room was listening now. He tried to control, but his voice was no longer sacred. Rocco's men seized him. Dr. Bianchi's security, legitimate, contracted, entered. Police didn't storm in with sirens. No cliché raid. Just consequences. Design Week guests watched, phones out, whispers igniting, the story spreading through Milan like fire. Silvano was dragged out, shouting, his polished calm cracked beyond repair. The traitor tried to slip away. Rocco stopped him with one quiet sentence. Don't, Rocco said. The man froze like a dog hearing its real master. Because the truth is, deepfakes and mimicry can replicate tone, but they can't replicate the invisible weight of real authority earned over years. The room emptied slowly after that. Sponsors left. Designers fled. Dr. Bianchi looked like she'd aged 10 years in one night. I stood in the center of the installation, shaking, not from fear now, but from aftershock. Rocco approached me. I didn't recognize his face, but I knew the sound of him walking closer. He stopped in front of me and said quietly, "You did it." I swallowed hard. "We did," I corrected. Rocco's breath shifted. Then he said something that made my chest ache. "No," he murmured. "I have men. I have money. I have weapons. I have infrastructure. I have fear." He paused. "You," he continued softly, "have courage that doesn't need permission." My throat tightened. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What happens now?" I asked. Rocco's silence lasted. Then he said quietly, "Now the city tries to decide what story to tell about tonight." I almost laughed. "They'll tell it wrong," I said. Rocco's breath was a soft exhale, almost amused. "Yes," he said, "they will." He stepped closer. I felt warmth. Then his voice dropped. Intimate. "Catherine?" he said. "Answer me." My pulse jumped. "What?" I whispered. Rocco's voice was rawer than I'd ever heard it. "After the restaurant," he said. "After the $10, after your answer. Did you know you stole my heart?" My breath caught. I stared at him, unable to hide the tremble in my exhale. "I didn't steal anything," I whispered. "You gave it away." Rocco went still. Then he let out a breath that sounded like surrender. In that unfinished sound room, built to capture truth, he did something I'll never forget. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't offer me an escape. He didn't give me a choice wrapped in control. He simply said, "I don't know how to live without tests." My throat tightened. Rocco continued, voice quiet. "But you make me want to learn." I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging. "That's the most dangerous thing you've said to me," I whispered. Rocco's breath warmed as he leaned closer, his voice a low confession. "I know," he said. "That's why it's true." I stepped into him then, not because I was swept away, but because I chose it with eyes that didn't need faces. I rested my hand against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Real, messy, human. And when I kissed him, it wasn't a hostage situation or an apology or a reward. It was a decision. Later, days later, Milan did what Milan does. It turned scandal into rumor, rumor into legend, legend into gossip, dressed as Design Week drama. Some people said a Mafia boss had staged an art show to humiliate a rival. Some said a waitress had been his secret weapon. Some said it was all performance. Let them. Only Rocco and I knew what really happened in the quiet. He had held out $10 as bait, and I had answered him with a no he could not buy. That answer stole his heart because it did the one thing money never could. It told him he could be seen without being owned. And I, Catherine, woman who can't recognize faces, finally recognized something I'd spent my whole life doubting. Sometimes the safest place to stand isn't behind a mask. It's inside the truth, with someone brave enough to listen.